At my own wedding gala, Lexi and Darian literally whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear that my dress looked like a total clearance rack find. They laughed, thinking Callum and I were completely broke and didn't belong in their high society circle. Callum wanted to shut them down right there, but I just held his hand, smiled, and took a sip of champagne. I told him to let them talk. Because what those two had no idea about was that my simple dress was a personal choice, and 3 months later, they'd walk into my penthouse office, desperately begging me to save their failing business. The grand hall was buzzing with people showing off their designer outfits, but I chose a clean, custom silk dress without any flashy logos. To Lexi, if it didn't cost a fortune, it wasn't worth wearing. She smirked at Darian and said, "Guess some people spend all their money on the venue and skimp on the bride." I just caught Callum's eye, gave a tiny shrug, and kept enjoying our night totally unbothered. Callum leaned in close, his voice low and steady. "You want me to drop a hint about who actually owns this estate, Lyra?" I chuckled softly and took a small bite of my dessert. "Nah, let them enjoy their little show, babe. Arrogance always pays the bill in the end." Right on cue, Darian walked over with a fake smile, holding 2 fresh glasses of bubbly. "Callum, my man, great party," he said, giving the room a quick once-over. "A bit modest on the wardrobe side, but hey, we all have budgets to stick to, right?" Lexi giggled behind her embellished clutch, pretending to look sympathetic. I looked Darian straight in the eye, keeping my smile completely relaxed. "We prefer investing in things that actually appreciate in value, Darian," I said smoothly. "A dress only lasts one night." Darian blinked, caught off guard by how chill I was before brushing it off with a smirk. Darian shook his head, taking a slow sip from his glass. "Well, in our world, image is everything, Lyra. If you look cheap, people treat you cheap. That's just how the game works." Lexi nodded along, flashing her massive diamond ring like it was a gold medal. "Exactly. I mean, I would never let Darian post a photo of me in something so basic." Callum just shook his head softly, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "We don't really play those kinds of games, Darian," Callum said, his voice super chill. "Some people build real empires while others just rent the costumes." Darian's fake smile stiffened for a second, but he quickly laughed it off, trying to save face in front of the nearby group. "Right, whatever you say, man. Just saying, if you ever need tips on making a real impression, hit me up." Lexi gave a phony little wave, and the two of them strutted off toward the bar, totally convinced they had won the moment. As Lexi and Darian walked away, Callum looked down at me and shook his head with a quiet smile. "You have way more patience than I do, Lyra. Darian's company is practically built on smoke and mirrors, yet he talks like he owns the city." I laughed softly, adjusting the clean lines of my silk dress. "That's the thing about loud people, Callum. They always make noise right before they crumble." We clinked our glasses together, totally tuned out from the gossip circulating near the VIP lounge. Around us, guests were busy taking photos for social media, trying so hard to project a life of endless luxury. But Callum and I didn't need validation from a room full of strangers. We knew exactly what Vanguard Capital held in its portfolio. As the music played softly in the background, I took a peaceful breath, completely content in the knowledge that true power never needs to shout. The wedding gala wrapped up around midnight, and while the guests spilled out onto the front steps waiting for their valets, Callum and I took the private elevator straight to the top-floor penthouse. I kicked off my heels and finally let out a long breath. Honestly, the best part of the night was watching Lexi try so hard. I laughed, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. Callum leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. Speaking of Darian, my team sent over a quick update on his real estate firm this evening. Turns out, his shiny lifestyle is fully funded by high-interest debt. I raised an eyebrow, taking a seat on the couch. "Let me guess, he's overleveraged on that new commercial property downtown." Callum nodded with a knowing grin. "Totally. He needs a massive cash injection within the next 90 days, or his whole empire goes belly up." I smiled serenely into my glass. The stage was set. Over the next few weeks, Callum and I kept our heads down, focusing entirely on expanding Vanguard Capital's new green energy portfolio. Meanwhile, Darian's social media feed was louder than ever. Every day was a new post, exotic sports cars, VIP dinners, and captions bragging about his upcoming mega projects. But behind all the flex posts, the financial grapevine was telling a completely different story. My chief analyst, Sarah, walked into my glass office with a fresh stack of reports. Lyra, Darian's firm just got denied funding by two major banks, she said, dropping the files on my desk. Their debt-to-equity ratio is terrifying, they're drowning. I casually flipped through the pages, seeing the exact red flags we anticipated. Darian was desperately running out of runway, and time was ticking fast. I looked up at Sarah and gave a subtle, confident nod. Keep watching them closely, I said softly. When a man builds a house of cards, he's always the last one to admit it's falling. By the second month, rumors were flying through the city's inner business circles. Word got out that Darian's flagship construction project had hit a complete standstill because subcontractors weren't getting paid. Lexi was still posting flash photos from high-end boutiques, but anyone with a basic understanding of finance knew it was all just damage control. One afternoon, Callum walked into my office, tossing his tablet onto the sofa. Darian's team reached out to our acquisition department today, he said with a half-smile. They don't know who owns Vanguard, of course. They just know we're the only private equity firm in the state with enough liquidity to bail them out. I leaned back in my leather chair, tapping my desk calmly. So he wants $10 million to keep his doors open, I said smoothly. Callum nodded. They requested a formal pitch meeting for next Tuesday. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Grant them the meeting, Callum. Let's see how loud he is when he's asking for a lifeline. Tuesday morning arrived, and the atmosphere on the top floor of the Vanguard building was crisp and silent. My executive team spent the morning running the final numbers on Darian's balance sheets. Every single column was painted in red. Sarah walked into my office to hand me the summary folder. Lyra, honestly, their pitch is pure fantasy, she said with a dry chuckle. They're projecting 50% growth while literally owing millions to their concrete suppliers. I took the folder and placed it neatly in the center of my desk. People who live in illusions always think others will buy into them, Sarah, I replied calmly. He built his entire identity around looking rich, and now reality is knocking on his door. Callum stepped into the office, checking his watch with an easy grin. Darian and Lexi just pulled into the underground garage in a rented Maybach. They're trying to look completely unbothered. I adjusted my blazer, smiling with total composure. Let them come up, Callum. Let's hear their story. Tuesday morning arrived, and the atmosphere on the top floor of the Vanguard building was crisp and silent. My executive team spent the morning running the final numbers on Darian's balance sheets. Every single column was painted in red. Sarah walked into my office to hand me the summary folder. Lyra, honestly, their pitch is pure fantasy, she said with a dry chuckle. They're projecting 50% growth while literally owing millions to their concrete suppliers. I took the folder and placed it neatly in the center of my desk. People who live in illusions always think others will buy into them, Sarah, I replied calmly. He built his entire identity around looking rich, and now reality is knocking on his door. Callum stepped into the office, checking his watch with an easy grin. Darian and Lexi just pulled into the underground garage in a rented Maybach. They're trying to look completely unbothered. I adjusted my blazer, smiling with total composure. Let them come up, Callum. Let's hear their story. The double glass doors of the Vanguard conference room swung open, and Darian strutted in like he owned the place, with Lexi right on his heel. Darian pulled back his designer jacket, flashing a heavy gold watch, completely unaware of who was sitting in the high-backed leather chair facing the panoramic window. Good morning, Vanguard team, Darian announced, his voice dripping with fake confidence. We're here to offer you a premier opportunity to partner with our firm. I slowly rotated my chair around to face them, resting my hands calmly on the table. The moment Darian's eyes locked onto mine, his smug expression froze instantly. Lexi gasped, her mouth opening in total shock as she clutched her expensive handbag. Lyra, Darian stuttered, taking an involuntary step back, his face turning completely pale. What are you doing here? I offered them a smooth, unbothered smile and gestured toward the empty leather chairs across the desk. Welcome to Vanguard Capital, Darian, I said quietly. Please take a seat. I believe you wanted to pitch us a $10 million deal. Darian stood frozen in the middle of the boardroom, his hand hovering over the empty chair as if he had just walked into a trap. Lexi looked back and forth between me and the sleek Vanguard logo on the wall, completely speechless for the first time in her life. You own Vanguard, Lexi whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Darian quickly cleared his throat, trying to regain control of his shaking posture, though his confident swagger was totally gone. Look, Lyra, There must be some kind of misunderstanding, Darian said, forcing a nervous chuckle. We thought we were meeting with the principal investors. Callum stepped out from the adjacent executive suite, holding two hot coffees, and leaned smoothly against my desk with a relaxed grin. You are looking right at the principal investor, Darian, Callum said in his calm, steady voice. Lyra founded Vanguard 4 years ago. Now, are we going to talk about your company's balance sheets, or are you going to keep standing there? Darian swallowed hard, realizing every single word he had bragged about at our wedding gala was now coming back to bite him. Darian slowly pulled out a leather chair and sat down, his hands visibly trembling as he opened his glossy presentation folder. Lexi sat stiffly beside him, her head down, completely unable to meet my eyes. All right, Lyra. Look, business is business, right? Darian began, trying to sound professional despite the sweat breaking out on his forehead. Our downtown commercial project just needs a temporary $10 million bridge loan to cross the finish line. Once it opens, the returns will be massive. I didn't even touch the glossy presentation he slid across the table. Instead, I pulled up our internal audit on my screen, tapping the glass lightly. Temporary bridge loan, Darian? I asked smoothly, raising an eyebrow. Because according to your actual debt reports, you owe $4 million to suppliers, $3 million in bank penalties, and your construction site has been completely shut down for 3 weeks. Darian's mouth went completely dry. He realized right then that we didn't just know his business. We knew every single secret he had been hiding behind his flashy social media posts. Lexi suddenly shifted in her chair, her loud, arrogant persona completely shattered. Lyra, please. If this deal falls through, they're going to seize our house and all of Darian's assets, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. We were wrong about you at the wedding. We didn't know. I looked at her calmly, my expression completely unbothered. This isn't about your comments at my wedding, Lexi, I said softly, keeping my tone perfectly professional. This is about risk management. Vanguard Capital doesn't invest in reckless spending and fake prestige. Darian buried his face in his hands, all his pride completely gone. What do you want, Lyra? Name your terms, Darian muttered desperately. I'll give you 50% equity in the firm. I closed the file folder on my desk with a quiet click. I don't want 50% of a failing company, Darian, I said smoothly. I'll buy out your entire property portfolio for 30 cents on the dollar, clear your debt, and take full control. That is your one and only lifeline. Darian's jaw dropped as he stared at me in total disbelief. 30 cents on the dollar? Lyra, that's practically giving my entire life's work away for free, he exclaimed, his voice desperate and strained. I leaned back comfortably in my chair, looking at him with absolute calm. It's 30 cents on the dollar or complete bankruptcy by Friday, Darian. The choice is entirely yours. Lexi frantically grabbed Darian's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Darian, just take it. If the banks foreclose, we lose everything, the cars, the house, our reputation. Darian looked down at the contract on the desk, his hands shaking as he realized he had zero leverage left. Every single flex, every arrogant comment, and every fake illusion of wealth had brought him straight to this exact moment. Slowly, with a defeated sigh, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his pen, and prepared to sign away the empire he had tried so hard to fake. With a trembling hand, Darian signed his name on the final line of the contract, the heavy silence in the boardroom broken only by the sound of his pen on the paper. Lexi let out a shaky breath, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, completely defeated. Darian slid the document back across the desk, looking up at me with tired, hollow eyes. It's done, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You own it all now. I picked up the pen, added my signature with calm precision, and handed a copy to Sarah, who was waiting at the door. The funds will be transferred to clear your immediate debts by 5 o'clock today, Darian, I said smoothly. Your credit remains intact, but your role in the company ends effective immediately. Darian slowly stood up, looking around the floor-to-ceiling glass office one last time, a world he had tried so hard to pretend he belonged to. As he and Lexi quietly walked toward the elevator with their heads held low, Callum stepped up beside me, slipping his arm around my waist with a soft smile. True power never needs to shout, does it? Callum whispered. I smiled softly, looking out over the city skyline, completely peaceful and content. With the agreement signed and finalized, Vanguard Capital gained full control of the prime downtown development project. Darian and Lexi had banked everything on public perception, But when forced to produce actual financial proof, their empire of cards collapsed instantly. News of their company's restructuring made minor headlines, but Callum and I remained silent, letting the numbers speak for themselves. That evening, standing on the balcony of our central office looking out over the illuminated city, Callum raised a toast to the future. "Silence truly is the ultimate response," he murmured. I smiled, taking a sip, knowing this was only the beginning of our true ascendancy. Over the next several months, the development project progressed at record speed under Vanguard Capital's management. Every milestone was met ahead of schedule, attracting major international investors and solidifying our reputation across the industry. Darian's former associates began reaching out, eager to align themselves with our firm, but we maintained strict standards, accepting only genuine partners of substance. During a quiet dinner with Callum after a successful investor pitch, he looked at me thoughtfully and asked if I ever regretted not confronting Darian publicly at the gala. I shook my head with a confident smile. The victory we built in silence was far sweeter than any loud argument could ever be. 6 months later, Vanguard Capital's board convened for our annual review, and the results were beyond expectations. The downtown complex had become a cornerstone of the city's business district, bringing in steady revenue and cementing our position at the top. Callum showed me an email from Darian's legal representative, officially confirming the final settlement of all remaining liabilities. Darian and Lexi had completely stepped away from the city's social scene, settling into a quiet, understated life far removed from their former grandiosity. Callum gently closed his laptop and looked across the table with a smile. "It's amazing how fast things settle when the noise clears," he said. I nodded, holding up my glass. "True success doesn't need an audience, Callum. It speaks for itself." Together, we toasted to the future, knowing that the empire we built on real substance would endure for years to come. A year later, Vanguard Capital had expanded its footprint across 3 major cities, becoming a benchmark for sustainable commercial development. Sitting in my corner office on a crisp autumn morning, I looked through a feature article in a leading business magazine highlighting our growth trajectory. The author noted how our firm had systematically acquired distressed assets and turned them into thriving hubs without relying on flashy publicity. As I signed off on the latest acquisition proposal, Sarah walked in with a warm smile, placing a fresh cup of tea on my desk. "The team is ready for the strategy meeting, Lyra," she said. I stood up and looked down at the bustling streets below. Every step, every decision, and every quiet power move had brought us to this exact moment of unshakable stability. I turned around, smiled at Sarah, and said, "Let's begin." The strategy meeting lasted 2 hours, culminating in the approval of our largest expansion initiative yet, a multi-million-dollar eco-friendly innovation park on the coast. As the board members filed out of the room, Callum remained behind, leaning against the edge of the conference table with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Lyra," he began, looking back at where we started, especially that night at the wedding gala, "it's incredible how quickly things shifted once the bluff was called." I smiled, closing my tablet. "People who rely on illusion always forget that reality eventually catches up, Callum. We didn't destroy Darian's business, his own arrogance did. We simply provided the landing pad." Callum nodded softly. "And built an even stronger future in the process." I placed my hand in his, looking out over the expanding horizon, fully confident in everything we had created and all that was yet to come. With the Coastal Innovation Park project officially greenlit, Vanguard Capital entered its most productive era yet. The city's financial journals began referring to our management approach as the standard for resilient, grounded leadership, a stark contrast to the speculative bubble that had swept away firms like Darian's. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Callum and I took a quiet stroll through the newly completed plaza of our flagship downtown property. Local shop owners and residents went about their evening, enjoying the space we had built. Callum squeezed my hand gently and asked, "Any regrets about keeping silent that night at the wedding, Lyra?" I paused, looking up at the illuminated Vanguard logo gleaming against the night sky, and smiled warmly. "Not a single one, Callum." Silence wasn't weakness, it was just the quiet before the victory. Years passed, and Vanguard Capital stood as an impenetrable fortress of success, built on vision and unshakable discipline. the story of our rise, and the fall of those who chose arrogance over substance, became a legend within the city's highest business circles. Lexi and Darian faded completely into the background, forgotten remnants of a world built on hollow showmanship. Meanwhile, Callum and I continued to lead with calm confidence, knowing that true power never requires approval from others. Standing side by side on our balcony, we knew our legacy was secure. We had played the long game, stayed true to ourselves, and built an empire that would stand the test of time. As the night deepened, the bright city lights reflected off the glass facade of the Vanguard Tower, a quiet symbol of everything we had endured and overcome. Callum turned to me, a smile on his face, and said, "Looking back, every challenge, every doubt, and every arrogant voice was just noise along the way." I looked out over the skyline, feeling a deep sense of calm and completion. "The noise is gone now, Callum," I replied softly. "Only the foundation remains." We walked back inside together, leaving the past behind for good, ready to embrace the peaceful future we had built with our own hands. The next morning, as a golden sunrise filled the corner office, Sarah brought in the final annual report for the decade. Every metric exceeded expectations, but more importantly, Vanguard had created thousands of jobs and reshaped the skyline with purpose. I signed the last document and closed the leather binder, marking the end of a long, transformative chapter. Callum walked in, setting down 2 warm coffees just as he had done on the day everything changed. "So, founder, what's the next goal?" he asked, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. I looked out over the thriving city below, perfectly grounded, calm, and fulfilled. "No more points to prove, Callum," I smiled gently, taking a sip. "Now we just enjoy the peace we built." With every goal achieved and our legacy firmly set, Callum and I decided it was time to step back from the daily grind and hand over the operational reins to Sarah and our trusted executive team. On our final day in the office, the entire staff gathered in the grand lobby to give us a heartfelt send-off. Looking around at the dedicated team that shared our vision, I felt immense pride. Callum took my hand as we walked through the glass doors of Vanguard Capital one last time, not as executives chasing the next target, but as partners who had mastered the game on their own terms. As we drove toward the coast into the warm afternoon sun, I knew that true fulfillment was about owning your peace. Our coastal retreat became a sanctuary of calm, surrounded by ocean breezes and endless blue horizons. Away from boardroom meetings and corporate battles, life took on a rhythm defined by freedom, balance, and quiet contentment. Every evening, Callum and I would sit on the veranda, watching the sun dip into the sea, talking about new artistic projects, personal dreams, and the beauty of a life well lived. The loud, shallow world of flexes and fake prestige was a distant memory, completely powerless against the inner peace we had built. As the stars emerged above the quiet waves, Callum pulled me close, and I smiled in the soft starlight, knowing that our story had reached its perfect, timeless end. Years passed gently, and our coastal home became a haven of creativity, reflection, and enduring harmony. Occasionally, Sarah would send updates on Vanguard Capital. The firm continued to flourish under the same principles of humble strength and rock-solid substance that we had laid down years ago. Darian and Lexi were now distant figures of the past, forgotten lessons on the fleeting nature of hollow vanity. Looking back, every lesson, every quiet move, and every moment of patience had led to this pure, unbroken serenity. Standing on the shore with Callum, watching the morning sun rise over the calm waters, I took a deep breath of fresh ocean air. The journey was complete, the foundation was unshakable, and the victory was forever ours. As the golden light of the afternoon filtered through the glass doors, Callum and I looked back at the legacy we had constructed, not just in concrete and steel, but in character, patience, and dignity. The noisy world of superficial triumphs and temporary dominance had dissolved completely, leaving behind an enduring silence filled with purpose. Every step of the way had proven that true strength does not crave recognition. It simply exists, unwavering and complete. With full hearts and quiet minds, we stepped forward into the sunset, knowing that our story was no longer about proving a point, but about living the truth. The final chapter of our story wasn't written in boardrooms or financial headlines, but in the serene silence of a life fully realized. As evening settled over the coast, we sat together under the starlit sky, looking out at the endless ocean horizon. We had walked through the storms of arrogance, weathered every trial of deceit, and emerged not merely victorious, but entirely free. The empire we built remained as an unshakable monument to truth, while our hearts remained forever at peace. This was no longer just a triumph, it was our eternal legacy. Years turned into decades, and our names faded into the quiet tapestry of history, exactly as we had wished. The foundation we laid remained unbreakable, a silent testimonial to anyone who would ever doubt the power of patient truth over loud deception. Standing side by side, watching the tide roll in under the infinite sky, Callum softly took my hand. No words were needed between us anymore. We had faced the world on our own terms, conquered every shadow with unwavering light, and reached the ultimate destination, complete uninterrupted peace. As the final stars faded into the soft pastel hues of a new dawn, a deep, lasting calm settled over the horizon. Every lesson had been learned, every storm had passed, and the empire of truth we created stood unshakable through time. I smiled softly, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the long, quiet journey that brought us here. With Callum by my side and peace in our hearts, we stepped forward together into a bright, endless morning, our story complete, fulfilled, and forever timeless.